coming soon. I gotta get drunk before the day begins, before my mother starts bitching about my friends.
I've been wanting to make a video on my current Enduro bike for a while now. My current Enduro bike is a 2018 KTM 250XC, and I've owned it since June of 2018. It is now, let's see, December of 2019, and I have about 106 hours on it. I think it is my favorite Enduro bike of all time. The 2017 and newer KTM two strokes are incredible, and you can go on the web and you can look at all the reviews. This isn't a review on that bike. This is more of a commentary, I think, of why I think a 252 stroke is so awesome, and specifically why I think 252 strokes are really overlooked, and I think they're underappreciated. And so I just wanted to share a few words and maybe try to talk about why I think they're underappreciated and talk about why I think they're awesome, and maybe convince someone that they should try a 252 stroke. So here I go. Let's see. A little bit of background on me and two strokes. So my first Enduro bike as an adult was a 2003 KTM 300, and I love that bike. It was at the time I wasn't a very good rider, but I knew enough to really respect and enjoy that bike, and I love that motorcycle. I mean, in 2003, KTM 300 was pretty crude. You could argue they're still pretty crude, but believe me when I say that in 2003, a KTM 300 was crude, and it was they were just as savage as they are now, but with a lot less development in chassis and suspension. So I owned that bike for a while, and then I ended up owning several other bikes. But then I went back to a 2009 300 XCW, which I rode for a long time. In fact, I just sold that bike. I sold that bike this year. So I've had two 300 KTMs, and I think KTM 300s are awesome. I think they have their place, and I understand why they're so popular. But I do want to make the case for not owning a 300 and looking at a 250 instead. And so, yeah, let me try to do that. So I lived in Portland, Oregon for 13 years, and the riding around Portland is, pretty wet, gnarly woods, right? It's perfect KTM 300, enduro riding terrain. First, second, third gear, you rarely get out of third gear. I mean, you get out of third gear when you're on fire roads, but then that's just to connect trails. So for me, that bike, the 2009 300 XCW was an awesome bike for that type of riding, and I really enjoyed it, and I could see why that bike excels. I don't know, I wasn't necessarily good enough, and I didn't necessarily ride a diversity of terrain to really understand the shortcomings of a 300, and it wasn't until I moved to Central Oregon, where the riding is in some ways more diverse and in some ways less diverse. It's more diverse because there's definitely more open areas, so you can get into higher speeds, and the soil is different, so you have to learn how to turn in a different way, and it's not so much woods riding around here. You can find definitely challenging obstacles, but it's definitely not woods riding. So when I came out here, I quickly realized that maybe a 300 wasn't the right bike for out here, and I also was looking for a change. I wasn't just looking for a change because my bike was a little older, but I was looking for a change just to learn as a rider, to develop as a rider. I had ridden that bike for a long time, and I had built some good habits and some bad habits around it. One of the bad habits I had built had to do with a recluse clutch, which that's probably a different video. I don't like recluse clutches for the average rider who's actually trying to improve, but again, that's a different video. So anyways, when I was looking at a new bike, I'd always looked at 250s and really was interested in 250s as an alternative to a 300. And I'll tell you what, I'm a convert. You know, I have enjoyed owning that 250 a lot, and I've ridden it a lot, and I feel like I've come much further down the path of a as a rider because of that bike. And so, you know, I guess I wanted to share that, right? I want to share why I think a 250 is a special bike, and I think the answer is pretty simple. You know, there's with a 250 and with a 252 stroke is such that for most people, I would say what I mean by that is the for most people of a reasonable weight. So, you know, I'm about 185 pounds. If you're in that range, a 252 stroke has a lot of power, right? And it also revs very quickly, right? Whereas, you know, if you look at a 300, you have a lot of power as well, but the motor revs differently than a 250. And then like a 200, you definitely lose a lot of power and maybe you rev a little faster, but it's not, I feel like you sacrifice a lot in power in a 200 and below. So 250 is like this secret sauce. It's like this perfect combination of power and quick revving. And it's just this beautiful formula that you don't get in a 300 and you don't get in a 200. With that said, it's not the easiest bike to ride. I think a 300 is probably easier to ride, especially the modern ones, and a 200 is easier to ride because there's a lot less power. But you can look at owning a motorcycle or an enduro motorcycle in two ways, and most of the guys I meet, I can kind of break up in these two categories. There's most guys that I meet that are my age, I'm 40, and there's guys that are older than me, obviously, that ride. You know, they just want one bike that makes their life easy, and they want to enjoy that experience, and they want to they want they want a ride to be as easy as possible, right? They want the bike to enable them to ride longer and ride harder things. And I think that's a super valid approach, and I totally get it. I think there's an alternative view which you see less, especially in their recreational riders, where guys want to ride a certain bike to get better. And I think if you're in that category of rider, I think a 250 is the perfect tool. So I, for years, rode just to have fun. I just rode to ride, and I didn't really give much thought about getting better. And it wasn't until maybe the past 4 years where I'd really decided, hey, this is what I do for fun, but I want to get better. And I'm going to try to search out tools to make me better. And one of those tools is the bike you ride, right? And so for me, a 250, when I chose to buy a 250, it wasn't under the pretense that a 250 is easier to ride than a four stroke. It wasn't under the pretense that a 250 is easier to ride than a 300. It was under the pretense that a 250 will teach me something. And I'll tell you what, it has. And it's awesome in doing that. Okay, so why are 252 strokes so awesome? Well, so to me, a 252 stroke is just this perfect combination of the right displacement and a light enough piston that revs really quickly. So if you look at a KTM 300, it's a little bit bigger of a piston. It revs a little slower and it makes just as much power, but just that small difference in displacement makes that 250 rev faster. And so, to put it simply, in my opinion, everything just happens faster on a 250. And you can definitely argue that things happening quickly is not good, and it's certainly not good in extreme conditions. But the truth is that most people are not riding extreme conditions. I mean, they're riding hard trails maybe, but not extreme conditions. And so to me, someone who rides hard trails but not extreme conditions, I enjoy being challenged to ride well and control the fast revving nature of the 250 in hard conditions. And then in open conditions, that fast revving nature is is just addicting, to say the least. And it is very unlike a 300. I remember the first month I owned my 2018 250, I took my 2009 300 and my 2018 250 XC out in my van, and I did alternating laps in this area that I ride a lot at. And this area is more open, you know, it's third, fourth, and fifth gear. I don't think I'm ever in second gear, but it's funny because I remember thinking after I did a couple laps where I alternated bikes is everything happens slowly on a 300. And I never thought I would think that. I never thought I would ride a bike that would make me feel that my 300 moves slowly. And I mean, don't get me wrong, a 300 two-stroke is a lot of motorcycle, and it can overwhelm you really quickly. But a 250 revs so quickly, especially the newer ones that have counterbalance motors, they rev so fast that things happen really quickly, and it's very exciting, and it's super rewarding when you get it right. I mean, it's addicting, and I can't really communicate how well how much fun that is to do it right, whatever that means, right? So so yeah, that was my takeaway. You know, I just kind of walked away thinking, wow, like KTM 300 is kind of everything happens in slow motion, which is crazy to think, right? So again, I just the 250, it's like this perfect formula, right? It's like this like perfect apex of displacement, you know, where you just get a ton of power and you get it very quickly. And I think that's something that is overlooked. I think guys look at, you know, power and torque curves, and power and torque curves are great. They're super telling, and they definitely tell a story of what a motor is going to feel like. But the thing that power and torque curves don't show and can never show is how quickly that motor gets into that RPM range and that power and the torque. I mean, those curves don't represent, they have no component of time, right? So, you know, when you pin it on a bike, it can take a long time for a motor to get to whatever, a certain RPM and a certain amount of power versus another motor that revs very quickly to that. So just keep that in mind. I mean, that's not representative in torque and power curves, you know. So why are 250s overlooked? I think they're overlooked because guys have associations with them as race bikes. They have associations probably of a 250 scaring them when they were a child. Sure. And the reality is that, you know, the 300 is like this unicorn magical motorcycle now. And I mean, it's not. I'm being sarcastic. It's been it's believed to be that, and it's very good, but it's not an end all be all tool. And so I just think the 250 gets overlooked. I think guys think, oh, 250 is smaller than 300. Why would I want that? And I think there's a lot missing in that idea, right? So I guess in my conclusion, my summary is, you know, if you're a type of person or type of rider that falls in the category of, hey, I want to get better, right? Then pick a bike, pick a tool that's going to force you to get better. I mean, you know, within reason, right? And I think a 250 is certainly within reason of a tool that's going to help you get better. And I guarantee you, if you're an intermediate or advanced rider, and you commit to riding a 252 stroke well, you will get better. You will improve. There's no question about it. And you'll go back to a 4-stroke, or you'll go back to a KTM 300, or just a 300 in general, and you'll feel like things happen slower, which is a really good feeling to have when things get hard, right? So try it, just think about it, consider it. I mean, usually 250s are less money than 300s, and I think 250s can be more versatile in many ways. And yeah, there's some really, really good videos out there on 252 strokes, and that sell it way better than me. But just take my word for it; they're awesome. And if you're not a really huge guy, I think you'll be really pleasantly surprised. So.